And so this year comes to an end, which leaves us with two important things. A year following which promises to not be quite as shitty, and Christmas. Now, people that know me know that I'm not a huge fan of Christmas movies, so it comes as no surprise that my favourite movies from this time of year are the ones that don't necessarily follow the conventional happy time of year stuff that we're used to. One of those is Nightmare Before Christmas, a great little film I've loved since forever, and The Grinch because in that movie I feel represented because I too hate Christmas. Or we have the subject of today's video. Black Christmas is a Canadian-based horror film released in 1974, both written and directed by Bob Clark. The movie contains a lot of tropes that we are now familiar with within the slasher genre. You know, this stalker invades a home or invades some sort of area, starts killing off our characters one by one until we're left with what is known as the final girl. Black Christmas isn't actually the only title that this film has been known as either. For example, in the United States this thing was initially titled Silent Night, Evil Night, and also, in production, this thing was called Stop Me, and I'm gonna go out on a limb here, Black Christmas is probably a better name than Stop Me. There were a couple of main inspirations that the people involved had during the production of this film, one of which came from the urban legend known as the babysitter and the man upstairs, as well as a series of murders that occurred during the holiday season in Montreal. The movie features a cluster of realistic, intelligent characters that speak and act as reasonable people would in this scenario, and this is probably one of the things that makes this movie a lot more advanced than I think people are willing to give it credit for. To many, this film also marks one of the earliest slasher films ever released. However, Bob Clark does see a little more in his movie than just your typical slasher film, having admitted that he sees Black Christmas as more of a psychological thriller than a basic slasher, and you know what? I'm actually going to give that to Clark, because again, when you look at the depth and detail in the characters here compared to any other horror film released around that time, it's clear that there's another level being worked on here. We're treated to a cold open of someone entering a sorority house by climbing outside of the building, entering the attic. Now this is our primary antagonist Billy. We're not going to know much about him by the time the end of the movie comes, but we will stop and talk about him here or there as he comes and goes. Inside there's a party, and in the next few scenes we're introduced to everyone on the chopping block, those being Jess, Barb, Phil and Claire. There are other characters here, but they're mostly nameless and won't play any impact on the story at all. On top of sorority girls, other mention-worthy characters are Mrs. Mack, Lieutenant Fuller, Peter, who is Jess's asshole boyfriend, and Mr. Harrison, who, sure, doesn't have a whole lot to do, but he's still there nonetheless, and he does have a name. Eventually the phone rings, and Jess, who's going to grow into the role of the primary girl come the end of the movie, is the person to answer the call. The call is revealed to be the voice of a twisted man, and it's also told to us that this is not the first instance of a call from this person that the girls have now deemed the Moaner. Now Billy, or the Moaner, is an aspect of Black Christmas that is utilised very well. In my eyes, there isn't many other horror antagonists that make me feel the same level of unease that Billy does. I won't sugarcoat it in the slightest, this guy is a complete freak. All of the actresses here do an incredible job when it comes to portraying the level of fear required to sell this moment to the audience. There isn't really any screen time wasted here, and they all do a great job with this script. It probably goes without saying that, but without a core of characters you enjoy seeing, it makes it difficult to invest yourself into a narrative and their safety. So many horror films tend to make everyone except the final girl shallow and two-dimensional. Clearly they are just to fill a roster and not serve any real purpose. They need to be killed without any hesitation or weight, and the only problem with this concept is that when our final girl finds them, we feel for her, but we feel absolutely no sense of loss for these characters who've lost their lives. Black Christmas balances everyone really well, and it develops every single character in ways that we didn't normally see, even in the 2000s, let alone the 70s. As Billy's vulgar comments continue to be spat out down the phone, we're treated to this slow pan as the camera takes its time to show everyone's reactions to the words, eventually ending on Claire where it lingers for a moment. It would have been incredibly easy for them just to focus on Jess and really establish her as the central character in this film. By opting for this route instead, it roots each of these girls equally in the situation. This is their issue rather than Jess's alone, and this is going to be something they deal with as a team. A few of the characters are trying to make the situation a little more comedic, but it's obvious that everyone is a little disturbed. After the calls turn into more of a bickering session with Barb being the main girl biting back at him, it ends with Billy stating that he's going to kill them, and the line just goes dead. The camera had obviously stopped its progression through the group on Claire, and she's easily the most intimidated of the group. She leaves to go and pack her suitcases, as she's one of the girls in this sorority house that's actually leaving for the holidays, and after failing to notice the intruder in the closet, she also becomes the first victim in the movie. After killing her, Billy drags her body up into the attic and leaves her in a rocking chair beside the window. This is going to come back around at the end of the movie, so just remember that. The next morning her father arrives to collect her, only to realise that neither he or the other girls have any knowledge of where she is. Mrs. Mack, who is probably one of the best parts about this movie, offers to help Mr. Harrison look for her. After this we also get the introduction of Peter, who is Jess's boyfriend, and I hate this man with a burning passion. She meets him to reveal that she's pregnant, but she wants an abortion. She doesn't want the kid. This enrages Peter because, he's a piece of shit, and he encourages her to at least continue the conversation later. Meanwhile in town we have a group consisting of Mr. Harrison, Barb and Phil heading to the police station to report Clare is missing. Sergeant Nash, who is going to be a familiar face to horror fans, doesn't really give the report too much thought. They learn in this scene that there's a local high school girl named Janice Quaife who's also vanished. Later that night, a drunken Barb is put to bed and Mr. Harrison, Chris, Jess and Phil help in the search for the missing girl. Her body is found by the police in the dark, swiftly ending that really strange subplot. This sort of feeds into one of the issues that this film faces, focusing on far too many plot lines at once. This plot line is genuinely a little baffling to me. I feel like it's supposed to be implying that Billy is the culprit, and to be honest, that is probably the case. But there's literally no breath of connection in the slightest, and I just feel like if they wanted it to be a bit more tight-knit, they should have done that. They should have added something else. On top of that, it doesn't really affect anything in the long run aside from a few choice lines of dialogue. There's also this scene in the latter half of the movie where these two search party members come to the house, and it's a scene that's played off very comically. So I don't know, I feel like they had good intentions behind it, but because of the execution this sort of goes down as a very unnecessary side plot. While this search is going on though, Mrs. Mack continues to search for Clare, eventually finding her body in the attic. She does only get a moment to process this discovery however, because the killer's lying in wait and eventually swings a crane hook straight into her face which hangs her and kills her. Now this is something I haven't actually ever questioned in the amount of times that I've seen this until making this video. Why is there a crane hook in the attic? I mean, that literally makes no sense at all. Jess answers another obscene phone call and decides it's time to file a report with the police. However, right in the middle of all this, everyone's favourite boyfriend, Peter, appears, suddenly dropping the bombshell that he wants to get married. Jess isn't about that shit at all and refuses, reconfirming to Peter that she wants an abortion. He, being typical Peter, turns into a huffy little shit and decides to leave as Lieutenant Fuller arrives with a telephone guy so that they can bug the phone. Jess is hanging around waiting to answer, but she quickly has to leave and run upstairs when she hears Barb having an asthma attack. When she wakes, she also tells Jess that she had a nightmare where this strange man walked into the room. Wow, it's a good thing that's not real, right? She eventually calms down, and after hearing the doorbell, Jess decides to go down to the front door, deciding she wants to listen to the Christmas carolers that have suddenly appeared. As if Barb was some sort of psychic, or, she wasn't dreaming, in walks Billy, who stabs her to death with a glass unicorn while her cries for help are completely dampened by children. This moment here gives us probably our closest look at Billy, shrouded in darkness with the exception of one lone eye. After this, Jess gets another disturbing call from Billy, where he starts reciting the argument she just had with Peter. That ends up beginning this whole red herring idea, suggesting that perhaps the culprit could actually be Peter. Lieutenant Fuller calls her next, telling her that the attempt to trace the call resulted in failure. He also considers that the caller could be Peter, but despite all of his shady behaviour and overall demeanour throughout the movie, Jess doesn't believe this is the truth. After losing Phil to an off-screen attack, Jess eventually receives what will be the final phone call of the movie. In this, Billy drops two names, one of them being his own and the other being Agnes. The call this time is long enough to be traceable, and Jess is horrified when the truth is revealed as Sergeant Nash instructs her to leave the house, because that's where the calls are coming from. Jess ain't taking no shit though, so she begins to search the house looking for Barb and Phil. It's a short-lived search however, because she quickly finds them both dead in Barb's bed. Through a crack in the door, Jess catches a glimpse of Billy's eye, slamming the door so hard in his face before running for her life. She flees towards the basement because leaving the house is clearly far too complicated, and she locks the door as the killer appears at the other side, beginning to bash it with all of his force. After a while, Billy gets a little impatient and decides to leave. He's got better things to be doing apparently. She hears his footsteps as they go back upstairs, and then eventually what could possibly be the sound of the front door opening and closing. But then out of nowhere, Peter comes back, and this time he's a changed man, determined to support his girlfriend and wanting an abortion. I'm just joking, this really shady appearance throws doubt into Jess's mind as she remembers the suspicion that Fuller had. He calls her name from the basement window, and when she doesn't answer, he decides to take things a step further by breaking the window. Like, really? Who does that in this situation? I mean, it does sound a little weird as he calls out her name, but really, man? Really? He climbs down into the basement and begins to search, eventually finding her cowering in the corner with a fire poker. The police arrive a few minutes later to the sound of Jess screaming. Eventually, when they go into the basement, they discover Jess barely conscious with Peter's bloodied body next to her. This seems pretty much like a case closed moment to the police, believing that Jess has finally put a stop to Peter's bloodshed. They take her upstairs and lay her in bed, sedating her for the time being with a police officer standing guard outside. This is really where we should have our happy ending, but we aren't gifted with as much. We hear the manic whispers beginning once again as it's revealed that Billy's still in the attic, with the undiscovered bodies of Clare and Mrs. Mack being visible through the attic window. The film ends on this slow zoom out of the window as the phone begins to ring once more, leaving Jess's fate ambiguous to the audience as we're taken into the credits. To talk quickly on Jess, I genuinely believe she's one of the most underrated and intelligent horror protagonists we've had. And that's pretty striking considering this is an old film. She has this genuine connection with all of the characters around her, and we really get a feel for her relationship with them, and we feel for her when these characters die because of that. All of the characters do actually feel really consistent with each other in terms of their writing. Look at Clare, for example, first to die in the movie. Even in her short appearance, the film is able to realistically convey her as a human being. She is a realistically structured character and we see who she is as a person. Each of the girls have their own little moments to shine and develop with each other, and at times it is genuinely a little difficult to tell who the central character is. No performance feels lackluster, every one of them has this different visual style and they talk with different mannerisms. It's clear that even if not completely intentional, these characters do have a certain level of care and agency that we don't get that often nowadays. I wouldn't go into this movie expecting top of the range effects. I mean, this was the 1970s after all. There are satisfying kills, sure, but you gotta remember this isn't exactly the era that's known for these groundbreaking visual effects. It gets around the issue though in the ways that it chooses to unsettle the viewer. And in my eyes, the main way of them implementing that was the phone calls. I've talked briefly on them, but I don't think that is enough. If you've seen Black Christmas, you will know that this film is at its peak when it is tormenting these girls with this guy on the other end of the line. One of the biggest things that's always got me about those phone calls, it's as though they don't make any sense, but it's as though he's desperate to be heard. When he's not making all these vulgar comments towards the girls or threatening to kill them, he's just making a bunch of unintelligible noises and grunts. I distinctly remember this impending feeling of dread the first time I heard those phone calls. It was just far too unsettling and something that listening to it just rubbed me the wrong way. These calls do work tremendously in this film's favour, and if not for Olivia Hussey's performance, would be the standout part of the film. Black Christmas is honestly one of my favourite holiday movies, and I think it's one that a lot of people sleep on. I don't really know anyone that has seen this film, which then brings me on to the question. Have you seen Black Christmas? Originally I did want to touch upon the remakes in this video as well, but I decided that they're not very good, they're probably not worth my time, and they're definitely not worth your time. If you have seen those things, I apologise and I am here if you'd like to talk. Hello and thank you so much for watching this year's Christmas video. If you enjoyed it, a like is going to go a long way and let me know you want to see more content like this in the future. And if you're new around here and you like what you've seen, then feel free to subscribe. We're on the road to 900 subscribers and we're right around the corner, so every little helps. Real quick before I go, I just wanted to make an announcement that I am now on Ko-Fi. That's going to act as a way for you to support me if you ever feel like you have the ability to do so. Now, I want to make it known that there is absolutely no requirement whatsoever, but as always, any help is much appreciated. So with all that said and done, once again, thank you so much for watching this video. My name has been Jordan, I hope you're all having a great day, and I will see you all in the next one.